Right, so whether you are here with us on Zoom or joining us on the live stream, it's a real privilege really to welcome you all tonight, and there's still people coming in. We'll just keep letting them in. We are really honoured to be welcoming an amazing array of speakers this evening on a topic that I think is almost overwhelming in its enormity and endlessly changing, and really, really important for us to be talking about. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Debbie Young-Summers, and I know Rabbi Mark is in here listening as well. We have a wonderful mixture of people here this evening. As a parent of younger children, this is something that is already worrying me about what is to come. I think giving us space to be able to talk about it and prepare ourselves and just feel the sense of community around the fear and stress around these issues is really, really important. And I want to say a huge thanks to all of our speakers for giving up their time tonight on a bank holiday weekend. I hadn't actually realised when we set this date that yesterday was the 3-year anniversary since one of my next door neighbours, Ollie Lee, took his life after, you know, so many of these struggles that we're going to be talking about tonight. And his mum and I, when chatting, she talked a lot about the Ollie Trust, which existed well before Ollie took his life, which stands for One Life Lost is Enough. And I think that as a phrase is a huge one for us this evening. But obviously there are many little steps that go on before we get to that point, and we want to be together as a community to help catch those steps before we get to the point that Ollie did, and that many others have, as we know, over the last months and years. So I'm going to be quiet now and hand over to people who know much, much more. Phil, Dave is here comparing for us this evening, so huge thanks to Phil, and huge thanks to Val and Marissa and the whole team at Edgware & Hand and all our amazing lay leaders who've helped to organise this evening as well. It's been a real team effort, so thank you, and I'm going to be quiet now.
Thank you, Rabbi Debbie. Well, good evening, everyone. First and foremost, if I might say, what a pleasure, a privilege it is to be given the task of comparing this evening. For those who don't know what I do, my name is Phil Dave. I work in radio and in broadcasting, and in particular, one of the radio stations I work at is in specifically men's mental health and well-being, but obviously it does focus on women as well. And I guess that's sort of what I'm hoping the idea is, that between the panelists this evening is that we'll sort of give an insight into what the world of mental health actually looks like, really, because I think there's a fear of the terminology mental health. But to me, it's not really any different from just saying health, because it all falls under the same category. Everyone has physical health, everyone has mental health. And for some, they're in better physical condition than others, and some people are in better mental condition than others, frankly. But let's find out from the panelists. We have a great team. So panelists, I tell you what, just for the sake so that everyone knows who the panelists are, because there's obviously quite a few people on video as well. Can you just raise your hands if you're a panelist this evening, just so we know who the panelists are this evening? There we go. Okay. So if we start off with Louisa, if you step forward, Louisa, and just sort of say who you are, where you're from, why you're here.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Louisa. I'm Louisa Rose. I'm the CEO of a youth mental health charity, founded and chaired by my friend over in the corner there, Johnny Benjamin. The charity is called Beyond, and previous to that, I spent 10 years as a social media consultant, and I still sort of dip in and out of that. And so I'm really here to offer points of view from both sides. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Ian, please.
Good evening, and I'm really pleased to be here as well. I'm Ian Russell, and I founded, together with family and friends, I founded another charity called the Molly Rose Foundation. Sadly, about 3.5 years ago, it was after the death of my youngest daughter by suicide that we founded the charity. Each of us who knew Molly has gone on a journey since then, and we've learned an awful lot. And I hope that the things that we've learned, that I've learned, might be of use tonight to you all as well.
Johnny.
Yes, so hi, I'm Johnny, and yeah, again, very, very pleased to be here. Very excited to have this conversation. This is my friend Charlie, who I'm with, we've just been on we're on a kind of mini, not just me, there's my friend here. We've been on a mini retreat at the moment, and we've been on a very long walk. Charlie is very exhausted, as you can see. But yeah, sorry, that's not really a good introduction. I'm actually, well, Louisa did it. I'm founder and chair of the youth mental health charity Beyond.
Thank you, yes, for clarifying. You're not here just to dog sit. The discussions that we're going to have this evening, I think it only fair to warn that they may be quite hard to listen to, but it's important to have the conversations, because what it would do is it will hopefully help others look out for signs and problems that may actually be in your family without you realizing it. Now, that's not to scare or worry anyone. It's on the contrary, it's actually to arm you with the knowledge needed to try and combat what is clearly one heck of a situation this country, and it's probably sort of the world at large, really finds itself in. So I think the fact that EHRS is prepared to talk about these sorts of conversations is a massive step forward. It is really an incredible step, and something that, let's just all be honest, let's come together. As Rabbi Debbie said earlier on, you don't have to give your real name if you'd rather not. You can change the name on the Zoom meeting so that you remain anonymous. You can message directly in chat to either Rabbi Debbie or to me. Probably is more appropriate just to send a question in if you don't want to ask it yourself. Or if indeed you do want to ask a question, feel free just to step forward at any time by just messaging in the chat saying, I've got a question, and I will call on you to unmute your microphone and to say what you have to say. I reckon that sort of one of the most obvious places to start with is what I was talking about just now with signs to look out for, because that's quite a big subject in itself, because that's a little bit like saying, well, what symptoms should I look out for if I'm not well, physically not well? Because it could be a great number of things. But definitely there are obviously telling signs that something's not right with someone if they are struggling mentally. So first thing I'd like to put to the panelists is a basic example of what you would look out for. Now, whilst you are compiling your thoughts on that, I also want to tell you that we have Gabriella Spillman with us as well. And Gabriella is going to... Well, Gabriella, would you introduce yourself? Just you introduce yourself and tell us why you are here this evening, because I think you are being incredibly brave and arguably the bravest panelist that we have. So would you please tell us why you are here?
Hi, I'm Gabriella, and I'm part of the youth board of Beyond. I joined the charity to offer my help and support for mental health issues in children. And I'm also here today because I speak from personal experience about mental health. I've suffered with anxiety for over 3 years, and it's difficult, and I understand how hard it can be. And social media can definitely make it worse, or it can make it better. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Gabriella. Thank you. Okay. Well, let's start off with signs to look out for, because Ian, with looking back in hindsight, you've already very kindly told us about why you're here and what happened to Molly. But would you please tell us, when in hindsight, were there any signs that you saw with Molly, or was there no apparent problem?
I have said before, and I will say again, honestly, there was no obvious sign to us of any mental ill health in Molly. But as everyone says when discussing mental ill health, there are always signs, however tiny, to look out for. And when we look back, there are a few, and there really are a few. I say that with hindsight, they all stack up. So like the fingers on my hand, they all line up, and there's quite a lot of finger there. But in reality, they were really spaced out, and the isolated incidents of those signs were very hard to spot. Molly perhaps spent a little bit more time in her bedroom as a 14-year-old, but her two older sisters might have done that as well, like many teenagers. Molly was into horse riding, and she said, I want to give up horse riding. I feel I've plateaued. I just want to give it a break, and when I get back to it, I will improve. Giving up hobbies and withdrawing is one of the signs to look out for, but Molly gave us a reason for it. And I think every time we look back, there's a tendency for us to blame ourselves. But I think what we've learned is that it's really important that signs are really difficult, sometimes really difficult to find, but you must trust your instincts, because I think your instincts will tell you if there's something wrong. And if you've got a hunch that there's a problem, if someone's giving up, talk to them about it. And the other piece of advice I would say, we'd say to Molly occasionally, what's wrong, Molly? We'd say to Molly, are you okay? And she'd say, I'm fine. What we should have been saying is, what's wrong, Molly? Because it's a more direct question. And I think that that's the first piece of advice that I'd give.
And of course, Johnny, one of the other problems is with that is that, and I know that you can speak from personal experience with this, that if someone does feel that there is a problem with themselves in a mental capacity, that sometimes they can go to great lengths to hide that there is something wrong. So it's not always so easy to spot that there are signs.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's really hard because, we didn't grow up with any mental health education, any of us, I'd say. And I think if we'd have had some sort of, mental health education, it would have made life for many of us a lot easier. We didn't have the emotional literacy I didn't have the emotional literacy that I needed when I was struggling. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the words, and I didn't have the confidence to talk about what was happening to me. And that's why I guess I hid, what was happening in my teenage years. I was embarrassed, and that's a very common thing, embarrassment and shame when it comes to mental health issues. And I just didn't know, and I didn't know, I was scared. I think I was scared as well of what would happen if I did start talking about it. So, when I was at school, the only kind of mental health education that I got was, they showed us the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And that film really scared me as I think I was 16 at the time. I don't know if people have seen that film, but it's a really terrifying film about mental illness, to be honest. And I thought that if I was to start sharing what was going on in my head, I would end up in a asylum back then, like that. So I think there's a lot of mixed reasons why people will, mask what's going on for them and not open up. But I think I feel positive that, because I do a lot of work in schools, and when I go into schools, I'm seeing more and more young people start to open up and start to say, I'll give a talk, and they'll come up at the end and they'll say, like Gabriella's just said, about her own mental health struggles, which I think is amazing, because I think it just shows that, the stigma that we have in society is reducing. It is reducing. We've got a long way to go, but I feel like we're moving in the right direction at last.
But Louisa, just as Johnny is saying there just now about sort of the only education that he had, and I should stress that Johnny and I are similar age, so I mean I can't imagine that sort of my introduction to mental health would have been much different at school either. But the fact that he said that the only introduction to mental health he got was watching the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and that's got to be the worst introduction to mental health possible, because anyone who doesn't know the storyline, I'm not going to go into it now, because honestly it's not really the kind of thing that we would want to talk about, because the way I look at that is that that's the attitude towards mental health of years gone by, and thank God it's the attitude of years gone by. But it's understandable that that's why people would be scared to actually say something.
Of course, it is what creates fear and shame around it. I've taken myself off it, yeah. It's what creates the fear and the shame. And I'm just a few years older than Johnny, and so, you know, I mean, I didn't even get shown one of the cuckoos. I don't know what's worse, being shown that or not being taught anything. To be honest, I think that, you know, my own struggles as well started when I was really young, and I had that same fear around actually. Well, it was actually the sort of lack of education around being able to acknowledge what was going on, and then coupled with the fear to actually, you know, identify and say it out loud. And I think, like as Johnny said, you know, we are moving in the right direction. You know, as a charity, we put on the UK's first ever mental health festival for schools. It's the first ever mental health festival for schools. It's 2021. You know, it shouldn't be the first, but it was. But at least we have moved in that way, and that, you know, schools are looking to embracing that type of content, which is great. But we're not there enough. And you know, it takes the bravery of people like Gabriella and other young people to really just come forward and say, you know, it's okay not to be okay. And I sort of felt like when I came from a place where I was enormously suicidal, to the point that I did make an attempt on my own life. And you know, when I sort of started to really get myself through it and sort of start to process it and really come to a place of acceptance, I realized that actually I sort of owed it to my past self, who felt all that fear and all that shame, to actually talk about it, so that I could dispel that for her, and therefore for everybody else who was sort of, you know, coming through and still feeling that fear and shame, and to say, you know what, it's actually okay. Like own it, because by owning it, you can actually do the things that will help you get.
Now, you know, Gabriella, there's one thing actually that you've already done this evening, which I think demonstrates the difference between what we're talking about, how things were, and how things are going. The fact that when I asked you to introduce yourself and to tell everyone why you are here, you very openly said, I have experienced anxiety. I have to tell you, I don't even think at the age of, just remind people, sorry, how old you are, sorry, just, I don't mean to be rude, but it's just so that people know how amazing that this is of you to do this. Just so you know, you are muted, so Gabrielle, if you unmute yourself, there you go.
13.
Right, so at 13 years old, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I don't even really think that I fully had an understanding of what anxiety was. Sure, I felt anxious. You know, a lot of people do feel anxious at all ages. It's not an age thing. But the fact that you can sort of say openly to, let's be honest, whether it's a room or whether it's a Zoom room, whatever it is, you are in front of a load of strangers, but you have confidently told us that that has affected you in exactly the same way that we wouldn't have a problem going into a room full of strangers and saying, oh, I've got a bit of a headache. It's exactly the same thing. This is what it boils down to, is that we all have physical health, we all have mental health. But one thing in particular that I want to pick up on, Gabriella, that you were talking about, is that you were saying that it could be exacerbated by the use of social media. Could you talk us a little bit through your experience of social media and what you meant by that?
I normally use social media as a way of contacting my friends, but in the past, I've treated it as a way of kind of taking advantage of the fact I was behind a screen, like saying things that I wouldn't necessarily say to their face. I've stopped doing that now, but obviously I know other people which may also or would have done the same thing. And I went through a tough time recently with social media. And now that I took a sort of break from it, I gotta say it's much better. Like social media can really make like mental health worse, because people don't understand how bad social media can actually be. Like it kind of distorts reality, making things seem perfect or good when, you know, maybe in the inside it's quite bad.
I mean, the fact that you've hit the nail on the head there straight away distorts reality. That's exactly one of the biggest problems with say, are you sure you're 13? You are incredible. Has anyone told you this? Seriously. Anyway, the point is that social media is ultimately a platform, and it's a platform for people to either make themselves look good. One of the cliches that comes out on social media quite a lot is the expression living my best life, which in itself is so dangerous because it's a load of bunkum. You might be having a good time at the time you post a photo, but that's not the reality. But the problem is that that's all people see. And what social media can also do is it's got a horrible habit of glamorizing something that is not glamorous. And Ian, I know that sadly your family knows only too well that that is the case. So would you just elaborate, just again, just in case people don't know, and obviously no one at any stage, by the way, has to say anything they don't want to. Let me make that very clear to all panelists and people who are asking questions. Please don't be forced into saying something you don't want to, but just know that anything you do say might help someone. So Ian, just from your perspective and something I know you've spoken about before, would you please sort of just explain to others your family's experience of social media, and dare I suggest the darker side of social media as well?
Well, I think we're living through a weekend where the FA have boycotted social media for a few days, in that case over racism directed at players in their sport. But there are lots of things that can misuse social media. It was never invented to do harm, I don't believe. But of course, like most human inventions, it can be misused. And after Molly's death, it goes without reason, we were in shock, but we were in shock because we couldn't understand why Molly ended her life. Couldn't understand at all. We live a very ordinary, comfortable life, but nothing special, very ordinary. And we just had to find answers. And what we found that Molly had been viewing on her social media accounts was really disturbing. It was the darker side of social media, but it was nowhere near the dark web. It was very easily available on platforms like Instagram, platforms like Pinterest. And Molly had, we're presuming, I should perhaps mention her inquest is still open, and we've got a very supportive coroner who's looking into the reasons behind Molly's death. We're nearly 3.5 years after her death now. And
Which is why I should say, obviously, at this stage, that we're not going to go into too much specific details because actually, for legal reasons, we can't. So that's sort of important to stress that. But yes, I was sort of from your personal experience, I should say. Sorry.
Yes, yeah. We found that Molly, who'd not seemed to be very much of a social media person, we all had family Twitter accounts and we followed each other. She was the one that didn't use it and then deleted it. She never had a Facebook account, but Molly had an Instagram account. Molly had a Pinterest account. And on those accounts, they found out, presumably because she started by searching for depression. I think she found herself to be depressed, or what she thought was depressed. Didn't quite understand it as a 13, 14-year-old. Reached out for help, as she would, to the internet, and maybe got some fantastic support, because there is fantastic support out there, but was connected on these really big global platforms to content that connected her to self-harm content, suicidal content, depression reinforcing, anxiety reinforcing content, and every day the algorithms of those platforms, having found that that was something Molly had searched for, pushed more and more content to her. And in it of itself, it wasn't necessarily terribly alarming. There's a simple black and white cartoon that comes to mind every time I talk about Molly, that we found that she had seen and she'd saved and she'd liked. And it just simply said, "Who would love a suicidal girl?" And that nihilistic, desperate message, times 10, times 100 maybe some days, was being fed and forced to Molly. Some platforms even went as far as emailing Molly to make sure that she was tuning into extra such content. There was no escape from it once the platforms had found and the algorithms had found that Molly was interested in this. And that's why I have said in the news that I believe that social media helped kill my daughter.
Well, I would like to obviously sort of stress, in the absence of any of the social media companies having any representatives here this evening, that we should obviously stress a couple of things. Number one, as you rightly identify, Ian, obviously the inquiry is still very much still ongoing, so we're not going to look too much at that. But I would say that social media has been built on a foundation of algorithms way before they were built on the foundations of knowing what could potentially be harmful content. And I'm speaking from my hat on now as with someone with a technical background, that I should explain that algorithms are there because ultimately social media is a marketing tool. And although there is never any excuse for pushing any sort of content, just to help people understand why this content keeps coming up, in case you may be forgiven for thinking it's a brutal nature of a social media company or a platform to keep pushing such content. The way it works is whenever one does a search on any platform, or maybe a search engine that uses something, I'm sure we've all seen that comes up with a little banner at the bottom that says it uses cookies. What those are is that they're data files. They're feeding information back into the internet pertaining to what you have searched for recently. And with that in mind, it's no coincidence that when you say go on Amazon or one of those other shopping websites and do a search for shoes, suddenly you get a load of adverts for shoes in your social media. It's just the way they work. So I think it's really important to stress that, and also to say that now, since that happens, that obviously social media companies are more aware. There's still plenty more still to do. Make no mistake, loads more still to do. But I just want to help people understand exactly the way the technology behind that works. But of course, Johnny, from your perspective, social media isn't necessarily all bad, because of course it's how you help to get your important message out there about social media. So there are some good sides to it, and as long as it's used for good purposes, it can actually potentially be life-saving as well as life-threatening in some horribly ironic way.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. That, I know there's particularly a big mental health community online, through various platforms, and I know a lot of people that have found these sort of communities really helpful for their mental health. I mean, yeah, for me, I started in my mid-20s, so I was really unwell when I was 20. I had a very difficult time in my early 20s, but then I started using social media in my mid-20s to communicate what was going on in my head. And yeah, I found it very useful. It's very useful as a sort of campaigning tool as well. It's got a lot of positives to it, yes, but to be completely frank, I have seen not just personally, I've spoken to other people that feel this, that, people are being more and more unkind on social media as the years go by, particularly on Twitter. That's a big issue. And, as Ian said, people are now boycotting social media. And I think we have to take a stand. I've definitely seen, particularly on Twitter, I started using Twitter a decade ago, and the level of unkindness has increased dramatically, particularly in the last sort of, say, couple of years. And I've made various complaints I've received a lot of anti-Semitic, homophobic abuse, particularly on Twitter. And yeah, it's getting worse. And I feel like Twitter in particular, I've had lots of conversations with Twitter, and I feel like they don't really know how to deal with it in the best way.
But then therein actually lies one of the biggest problems as well. Again, let me make it very clear. I will never, ever defend abuse of any kind on any platform, however it comes up, whether it's through algorithms, whether it's through so-called keyboard warriors. If you don't know what keyboard warrior is, it's the somewhat ridiculous nickname given to basically bullies who are online. So they are individuals who decide they were going to use social media for less savory purpose, where they will use that platform, possibly anonymously, to attack somebody else and to lower their self-esteem or whatever it may be. Just all sorts of horrible reasons. Absolutely, it is true that Twitter has become a bit of a cesspit in that regard, because it's so easy for people to hide behind. But therein, as you mentioned about they don't necessarily know how best to deal with it, is the problem. Because you're talking about ultimately a company that could have as many thousands of employees as you would like to have, but you can't read every single message that's put out on these platforms. And this is possibly, Louisa, one of the biggest problems that we face in this day and age of social media, is that because people are allowed to use it for not so nice purposes, I'm being very polite here, but, you know, pretty awful purposes, let's be honest, and there is not necessarily an easy way to moderate that. This is a big problem that we're facing.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It really is. I think one of the keys for me to mitigating this a little bit, these sort of the negative side of it, is education. So, you know, I really strongly believe that, like, you wouldn't give the keys of a car to somebody who's under 17 without teaching them how to drive. You probably shouldn't give keys to the car anyway, but you wouldn't give the keys to a car of someone who does not know how to drive. But you are absolutely doing that with social media, because you're not teaching them how the platform is built. And yes, it was built in innocence. It was built, most of the social media platforms that we're talking about right now were built to improve communities, to bring communities together, to bring like-minded people together, to empower, to inspire, to motivate. And they can absolutely still do that. But unfortunately, as the years go by and society gets almost better at actually knowing how to be unkind on them, they take advantage of them. But those algorithms are sort of the beast, right? And they were unleashed at the beginning, and now they're being sort of manipulated in a negative way. So if we're not educating the sort of next tech generation of how these platforms were built in the first place, so that they can actually start to understand how those reinforced how that reinforced content actually appears, how it's not just about what you search, it's about who you interact with, it's about who you allow to follow you, it's about when you're on, it's about where you're tagging it. There is so much information that you are giving these platforms that in its sort of in its most innocent self is there so that it just constantly personalizes content to you, right? But if we're not teaching everybody how that this is actually what happens, then unfortunately we do end up in a situation where we are just shown negative content, or as Ian says, you know, content that reinforces what those previous searches were. And so perhaps if Molly had, you know, Ian, forgive me for mentioning Molly, but if she was perhaps, she searched that, and then because she had searched it, perhaps a trigger had gone out to the algorithm that said, actually, we shouldn't serve any more of this type of content to this particular user, then maybe there would have been a different outcome. But we're only just having these conversations now. So for me, it's all about educating young people to actually understand how the platforms are built, to navigate them, how to navigate them in a safe way that nurtures the positive elements of it and actually mitigates the negative. Teach them how to curate their feeds, teach them how to report properly, teach them that it doesn't actually need to just live in the realms of what the platform has as a tool for reporting. It can go beyond, you know, if it's inappropriate, it can be reported to the police, it can be reported to a number of different websites. You know, it's about education. So for me, everything comes down to education.
And may I just say at this stage, obviously, that sort of you mentioned, Louisa, about Molly's case, and obviously it's still very much being looked into. So we must be absolutely clear. Yeah. No one knows what the different outcome would have been. We need to deal with the here and now. That's what's really important, and what we must try and use this evening to focus on. But if I might ask, that just to remind anyone who's possibly just joined us, that if you do want to join in, this is entirely interactive. I'm sure that, like me, you're finding everything our panelists are saying this evening really interesting, and we absolutely want to hear what they're saying, but we also want to hear from you as well. There are currently, in this Zoom meeting alone, at least 30 devices that are connected. I don't know how many are watching on live stream. I haven't been given that information, but let us assume that there are also some people who are watching as more than just one person to one device. So I'm going to hazard a guess and say there's between 50 and 60 of us here this evening, all come together to talk about this. Let's not waste this opportunity. If you have any questions, any thoughts, even, it doesn't have to be a question, even if it's just a thought process, please share it. You can either message me directly on the chat, or you can even, if you would rather, you could just raise a hand and let us know that you want to say something. Again, message in chat, and then that will be absolutely fine. I've just been told reliably that there are now 10 people watching on the live stream as well, which again might not sound many, but do think along the lines of the fact that there's normally more than one person to one device, and the fact, like I said, there's 30 in this group chat as well. I'm going to go on the basis there are at least between 50 and 60 of us here this evening, which I think is pretty incredible on a bank holiday weekend, and goes to show how much as a community, as the EHRS community and beyond, we want to do something, and we want to start having these conversations. So let's have these conversations. Gabriele, if I just come back to you, and if I want to remind you and others that you absolutely do not have to say anything you are uncomfortable with talking about, and you certainly do not have to answer anything you don't want to answer. But just from your experience, from when you were using social media and you went through the rough time with social media, can you give us an example, without mentioning any names, of what happened to you, you know, what was potentially said, how it made you feel? Okay, that's what I want to know. I want to know what was said and how it made you feel, because I think that will give a real insight to people watching this evening as to maybe signs they could be looking out for. You could be helping even more than you already have done by potentially sharing that, if you want to.
Well, it was very rare that I got things said to me directly, but I was seeing a lot of stuff that maybe wasn't aimed at me, but seemed to be on other people's stories, like on Snapchat, Instagram, stuff like that. So most people now like to take videos from TikTok, post it on their stories, which has writing in, which are aimed at other people, like saying how like they're stupid or something like that. And sometimes it's a lot harsher. But then when people see that, obviously, it makes you overthink, and that happened to me quite a lot. And then the things said to me directly could also be like, maybe I wasn't very smart, or I was dumb, I wasn't pretty, wasn't good looking, stuff like that. And like, I know I am quite young, but obviously other people like take advantage of stuff that I've said to them in trust, like relationships, such as people would say to me, maybe if you'd done this, you would still be friends with them, or stuff like that. And that really got to me.
Because what does that do to you, Gabrielle? Does it's because, and I'm going to be honest, I've seen things on social media, even at my age, and I'm just putting it out there, I'm not 13, but even at my age, there are things that absolutely I've seen on social media that the only way I can describe is it physically hurts. There's something that someone says, and it just plays on the mind, and it manifests itself as some sort of physical pain, as if to make me really doubt myself, really question what I've done and what I have said to actually warrant such a response. And I'm just wondering if that was something similar to how maybe you felt as well.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, when I was seeing those comments, my heart, like, literally, it just sunk. That was the feeling. And I was just feeling awful about myself. I had no self-esteem. I wasn't confident anyway, and my anxiety started to get a lot worse. And other mental health things could have happened if I didn't get help.
Now, thank you for that, Gabriella. Thank you. Ian, I know that you wanted to come back on. We were talking a little earlier on. Louisa was mentioning about sort of the ramifications of social media and the good and bad from it. What did you want to say off the back of that? Sorry.
I think that sense of responsibility is where we're learning as a world, which is really important. And I was lucky enough to meet Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. It was a lecture he gave, and it was very interesting. He said his web was broken and needed fixing. It needed fixing urgently. So very honestly, for lots of reasons, including the reasons we're discussing tonight, he wants the web to be different. And his organization, the World Wide Web Foundation, has come up with a charter for the web, which says that at national level, governments should do something to make the web a safer place. And we can see around us that governments, lots of governments, are taking steps now to do that. Our own government in the process of introducing online safety regulations to try and make the web a more regulated and therefore safer place, as they are in Europe as well. The US are beginning to look into this as well. So countries are taking steps to make the web safer. Corporations and companies need to do that as well, so that the platforms we're talking about need to take more steps than they have. There have been some things that have made their platforms safer, but there's still harmful content to be found. So they need to be more responsible and show a corporate social responsibility that hitherto they haven't done to make the platforms safer. And all of us need to take our own safety responsibly. As Louisa and Gabriella were saying, you need to be able to say, I've been hurt by something, and you need to be able to talk to someone about it, whether that be your parents or your friends or someone you trust, and someone who could lead you to help if you need it. And you also need to take that step to be able to report harmful content if you find it. It's sometimes very difficult to do. We did this after Molly's death, and we found that quite often the platform said, oh, it doesn't, it's not a problem. Our community guidelines haven't been broken. We're going to leave it up, which we were horrified about. But there are organisations like the UK Safer Internet Centre and other places that can help you report content, and then that content gets taken down and we all learn better about it, and the online world becomes a safer place.
I'm delighted to say that people have responded to the call out for questions, and Lisa has put out in the chat, and I don't know who wants to answer this, but obviously make yourself known. How can we know what our children are doing on their devices? We have to trust them for their mental health, but we have to be looking for issues as well. It's a real catch-22. Who wants to step forward and answer that? All right, Louisa.
So yeah, I think it's really difficult. So everybody knows, I'm a parent. I have two very small children, so I'm not at the stage where they are on social media, but I am at the stage where I can already see how hooked they get on a television screen. And so I think that one of the ways that I often talk to people about this is, if you go along the journey with them, because just like you don't actually maybe know all of the risks that exist or why they actually are particularly risky, your child probably doesn't either. So they know that, people can be unkind on social media, and they know that, there is harmful content. Do they actually really understand how those things can be presented on their own social media profiles? I don't think so. Very, 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 very seldom do they. So if you can go along the journey with them, learn with them, watch things like The Social Dilemma with them, help them to really understand what the pitfalls are and why they even actually are there in the first place. Because like we've all said, it wasn't set out, social wasn't set out to become or to be this big bad place. It was set out with the greatest of intentions. And so it's just about helping them to really understand what the mechanics are behind the scenes that are sort of reinforcing certain content, how they can actually really look after themselves on it. Talk to them about privacy. If you teach your child to, I always say this, so I'm really sorry if anyone's heard it before, but if you teach your child to look at your iRing doorbell or whatever, because a lot of people now have a screen that shows them who's outside the front door. If you teach them not to open your front door if they don't recognize that person, and teach them not to accept a follow request from someone who they don't recognize as well. It's really, they're actually quite simple things, but because we're missing this massive larger piece around education, not just of the children, but actually parents as well, because these are quite new platforms to us as well, then it's more difficult. So I think it's about going along the journey, teaching yourself and teaching your children, and then coming up collaboratively with sort of solutions and ways that they can avoid it. And of course, depending on the age of your child and whether you think it's appropriate, there are third-party platforms that can help monitor your devices, your children's devices and your family's devices.
Well, you mentioned there about The Social Dilemma, which, by the way, if anyone has not seen, please do watch it. It is a Netflix documentary. I'm not being paid by Netflix. I'm not interested in promoting them unnecessarily, but I'm telling you this because if you want a better understanding of how social media actually does work and really sort of the thinking behind social media, This is coming from people who've worked in the industry. It's a documentary about social media from people who helped to create it. And it really gives you an insight as to sort of the reason why it is what it is. And it's fascinating and possibly a bit terrifying all at the same time. Rabbi Mark has also joined in on the questions, and he's put out about schools and whether or not are they educating young people about the morals of posting nasty content, such as the ones that Gabriella was speaking about earlier on. So I know that, Johnny, you've been working quite closely with schools. I don't know whether or not you've looked necessarily at social media, but I know obviously you're working closely with schools. But I'm sure the conversation of social media must have come up in your time working with them.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. To be pretty blunt, a lot of the schools that I've worked with say it's not our responsibility. It's up to the parents. And then I speak to the parents, and the parents say, well, it's the school that needs to sort this out. No one really likes to take responsibility for this, and someone really needs to take the responsibility. Yeah, I do think schools need to be doing so much more. And the thing with schools now is that, they have these dedicated PSHE lessons. When we were at school, Phil, I don't know about you, but we never had anything like these PSHE lessons. And these PSHE lessons are all about, teaching life skills. And I think managing social media is or managing technology. And it's not just social media, managing technology in itself. I've heard some, I've been into schools where, the kids tell me they're on their phones at 2 a.m., which is just, I don't know, it really bothers me. So it's not just social media, it's technology. We need to be giving these life skills to young people, and from an early age. So I've got nieces that are, 10 and 6, and even my 6-year-old niece is now on TikTok, and I do worry about that a lot. She's 6, and she's just kind of obsessed with TikTok at the moment, and I'm a little bit concerned about that. So I think it needs to even be beginning in primary schools, really. People are, again, myself and Louisa, with our charity, we're doing a lot in not just secondary schools, but primary schools. And we are seeing primary schools now wake up to this. But often, actually, the teachers just don't know what to do, or where to start, or how to find good kind of content. So actually, we're putting together, we put together a lot of content on our website. And actually, we're doing a panel during Mental Health Week, which is in a couple of weeks. Actually, it's next week. Mental Health Week is next week, sorry. So we're doing a lunchtime panel on social media, particularly around kindness on social media. So, and that's for all schools. We'll send out some information about that because, we think it's really important.
And I'm sure that we'll be able to do something with the EHRS website to put it on there as well. I've just kind of landed myself in hot water because I don't know that for sure, but I'm fairly sure we can do something with it. Anyway, off the back of that, one thing that sort of strikes me, and Louisa, I'm sure that you'll sort of have something to say about this as well, is it's if you think a child is old enough and responsible enough to have access to, say, a mobile phone, a smartphone, I think it's very easy for people to forget that what smartphones do is it means there's no escape, right? This is really important, and I think that we never really think about this because actually there's no escape for anybody of any age. Yes, a smartphone has revolutionized our life, but what does it mean? Well, from an adult's point of view, it means you never switch off from your emails because they're always there. It means if someone wants to phone you, no longer do they leave a message on your answer phone, and when you get home, you'll hear the answer phone and you'll think, oh, I'm too tired to call them back now, I'll call them tomorrow. That's all gone. It's just there. Okay, you've got voicemail, but then you've got a notification that pings up straight away saying you have new voicemail, compelling you to listen to it and to hear what's going on. And of course, if it is on a particular platform such as, say, WhatsApp or any other of those messenger services, and of course iMessenger as well if you have Apple technology, is it can come up as read. So now you actually know someone's read that message, compelling you further to get back in touch and carry on the conversation. Well, that's what it means for an adult. But we could potentially know what that means for ourselves. But what about if you think a child is responsible enough to have a mobile phone? That also means no escape for them as well. So maybe any bullying they're being subject to at school, it means there's never a turn off. It means you can never get away from that. Maybe if it means that they are feeling pressure about a certain subject, they can look it up online, any online content, and they can still feel pressure about that. This is a real issue that we don't think when children are given mobile devices that have access to the internet and these other applications. In essence, what that's doing is it means that your child has no escape either. And Louisa, I know that that's sort of something that you can pick up on.
Yeah, I was just actually, I was writing notes so I didn't forget. There's a couple of things before I actually respond to that I'd love to ask Gabby, if that's all right. Gabriella. I would love to know, first of all, Gabriella, how you tell the time. Do you use your phone or do you have a watch?
I have a watch, which I use most of the time, like in school and stuff. When I'm not in school, I do look at my phone to look at the time.
And on your phone, do you have notifications on your phone?
No, I turned it all off because every moment I was getting a notification, and Phil said, you just can't escape it.
Yeah. So the reason I ask is because I think that we're all of the agreement that Gabriella is particularly wise for her age, and she's very much ahead of the curve because just going back to schools, I do some talks in schools around the relationship between social media and mental health and ways that you can kind of mitigate it. And one of my first questions is always, how do you tell the time? There are very, very few young people who wear a watch, and actually even fewer who wear an analog watch. And the reason why I say that is just because from such an early age, our young people are immersed in a digital world. And the moment that we start that relationship with digital technologies, it's a sort of rabbit hole, that sort of ends somewhere between social media and, dark web. And so in order to sort of stop that happening, if we kind of trace it all the way back, some of the things that I often say are, try and wear a watch, try and make it an analog watch so that you can kind of cease that sort of habitual response of picking up your phone when you want to tell the time. Because the second part is, if your notifications are on and you've picked up your phone to tell the time, if you're a young person who isn't sort of as kind of, let's say, self-aware or necessarily just sort of in the know really about what notifications do to your brain, then you're most likely going to open your phone. So you've told that you now know the time, but you also know that you've got 6 notifications on Instagram, 10 on Snapchat, so-and-so's liked your picture 8 times and blah, blah, blah. And you probably then go to apps. And then once you're in those apps, unless you have been taught how to mindfully scroll, and by what I mean that you are very conscious of the content that you're scrolling past and the content creators, that you are actually following, and the amount of time that you're spending on them. If you're not mindfully scrolling, you could very easily be 64 weeks deep into somebody's feed. And so when we're talking about phones, I don't think that phones and social media are two separate things. I think they're part of the same problem. And I think it all comes back to education, are really just kind of empowering young people around how to take control back. And I think that was what I was going to say on that. And now I can't actually remember if I've answered the question. Sorry.
Well, I would suggest that even if you haven't, what you've said is of highest importance. So thank you for highlighting that. Look, I think that sort of what we need to establish now, and what we've all heard this evening has been really interesting, and I'm so sure fascinating. I think there's been some messages I've seen as well that people have said thank you for a great discussion. We're going to very shortly open this up to become an open forum. Okay, this will be the next part of this evening. The panel discussion is the first part, but it's very much about you now taking advantage of the panelists and everyone that you can see here in front of you and making this an open forum. I really need your help with this, okay? I need you to step forward and to have the conversations that maybe before this evening you weren't brave enough to do, or maybe you didn't even think of having them before this evening. You can remain anonymous if you want, keep your camera turned off, change the name, in the description of who you are in the Zoom meeting. You can do whatever you want. You can message me and I can say it out aloud for you if you would rather. But please do remember this. The next step of this evening is we're going to have this open forum, and I really want everyone to join in with this, okay? Really important we do this. We've got to start breaking down these proverbial barriers and start sort of moving forward and tackling.
Before we start that, Phil, can I just note we are going to stop the live stream at this point. So I'm just checking that the live stream has caught up with us. And
we've got one more bit for live stream, just before live stream. There's one more bit before that. That's why I'm announcing this now so people can get their thoughts together. But one more bit for the live stream, and that is advice, because this is what's so important. Something we absolutely need to cover is the advice given to people who are watching this, who are maybe concerned. Ian, can we start with you? Because I know this is very much about sort of what you do with the foundation in terms of sort of helping other parents and offering advice. If someone is watching this now, is maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed by the discussion and now possibly even feeling a bit panic-stricken themselves, what can you say to them?
Please don't panic, because there's huge amounts of support available online. So that's one of the good things that the World Wide Web delivers. There's so much support, it can be bewildering, especially if you're the person in crisis. So like many charities, we have a website, the Molly Rose Foundation website. We have we only have one page, and on there are a list of things that help with young people's mental health. So there are charities like the Shout text line, which is a really good place to go, especially young people quite often find it easier to communicate using text rather than speaking, voice communication. And the Shout text line is an amazing 24/7 text line any of us can use for about anything, and you're connected to a volunteer who will help you get support. There's a charity on there called Papyrus, which specializes in suicide prevention for people under the age of 35, or anyone concerned about a person under the age of 35. So there are good places to get support there. And the other thing that we've partnered with is a New Zealand charity who have they're trying to develop a global help platform that will direct you to the sort of help that you need. So if you're having problems with an eating disorder, you need help that's designed to help you with an eating disorder. If you have problems with anxiety or with self-harm, you need help that's different. And so again, on the Molly Rose website, there's a sort of online tool that says where to get help, and you can filter that sort of help you're looking for, and also how you want to get it. So if you only want text-based help, you can filter for that. So there's lots of places to go online, and I know Beyond has lots of resources as well. And the last thing I very quickly want to say is we also send out packs of help cards to schools and youth-based organizations. So if you think your organization would benefit from having where to get help cards, and that minimizes that long list and reduces them to a shorter list so that someone in crisis may more easily find help. We send those out free of charge, and there's a form you can fill out on the website. So there are lots of places to get help, and lots of places that will help you find the right help. So please don't panic, but do look for help.
And I'm just going to ask the other panelists to sort of say if they want to say anything, then go for it. And then what we'll do is we will move on to our open forum. So is there anything else you'd like to add to that in terms of advice to parents? Johnny, go for it.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Ian said. There are some amazing charities and organizations out there. Another one is Young Minds as well. And Young Minds have a parent phone line, parent helpline. For anything and everything. They're literally, any questions about technology, social media, or anything wider than that, they're happy to answer. And another great organization as well is The Mix. It's fantastic. They cover a lot of subjects that maybe other organizations are a bit afraid to go into. They'll literally cover anything and everything in terms of, young people's well-being. So yeah, The Mix and Young Minds are two other brilliant organizations.
Thank you. Okay, and Louisa, please.
I just to add, Ian and Johnny have covered so many amazing organisations for mental health support, but just in terms of advice for a parent who might feel overwhelmed at the sort of content that we've been discussing, the social media element of it, and you might think that you don't know any of this and where you're going to learn it. There's a website called the SWGFNL, and they produce some really, really great concise information about each social media platform, and actually it's great for a parent or for a young person, really. And just wanted to flag that one.
And just to point out as well that some of these great organizations that have been mentioned this evening, Rabbi Debbie is very kindly messaging everyone the links in the chat. So if you want to have a look there, you'll find it there. I might also suggest as well that there's been an awful lot of information that's been thrown at you this evening. So if at any point you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, you can't quite remember everything, please don't worry. The EHRS website has been updated accordingly with lots of information there. So absolutely go to ehrs.uk and you'll be able to find in the, I think, if I'm right in saying the community section, if I'm not very much mistaken, that's where this information is going to be put. And if not, we will make it clearer as to where that is. I think that what we'll do is, just for the purposes of the live stream now, which we're just about to finish, I'd like Gabriella, if I may, just to give you the final word. And I really want you just to sort of say, as a sort of a final point, to anyone who is watching this now, who maybe is nearer to your age, who may be feeling anxious, who may be sort of thinking that they don't want to be open and honest and talk about what they're going through, what would you say to them? Imagine you're talking to them right now directly.
I would say there's nothing wrong with speaking out about it. And honestly, once you spoke to someone about it, it feels so much better. And I gotta say, it helped me a lot when I started speaking up about everything that was happening with me. So the main thing is to not be scared or afraid of someone judging you, or maybe them just leaving you in the dust. Just open up, and it helps a lot.
Thank you for that. I don't think there's a stronger note to finish the live stream on. What I will say, though, is that I have been reliably informed that the website you are after for all the information you need is ehrs.uk/mental health. At this stage, I'm going to say thank you to all of our panelists for the discussion this evening. We are now going to stop live streaming, but the conversation continues. If you want to join in, have a look at the week ahead sheet. You'll see the Zoom details, I believe, on that, and you should be able to join us in the Zoom chat and be able to carry on the conversation. And there we will be an open forum for people to either remain anonymous or to come forward with any questions they have on mental health. We'll be doing that until about 8:30. So step forward, please do join us, and thank you very much indeed for watching this on the live stream. Okay, live stream, I believe, has now been disconnected.